Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome. Welcome on this autumnal equinox. Happy fall, everyone. I am Christina Watts. I am your worship associate today. My pronouns are she and her. As we begin our service, I invite you to silence your phone, close other windows on your computer, take a deep breath, and center yourself for worship. We open in welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land who live on in their descendants, the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Potomac Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move towards healing so that all together shall one day know full justice. All right, welcome to today's service. Thank you, Brad. Our minister, Reverend William Levewood, is here on most Sundays, but today I am happy to welcome the Reverend Kirk Freeman. Pastor Kirk is the minister at Davies UU in Camp Springs, Maryland. Today we're doing a pulpit swap, so our minister is preaching at Davies and Pastor Kirk is joining us here at Accotink. Whether you're a longtime member or a newcomer or something in between, we encourage you to stay for our social hour, online and in person, immediately after the service. We're so delighted that you chose to join us today. Welcome. And now it's time for our chalice lighting. So as we light our chalice, please join in reciting these words from our mission statement. Together, we care in community. Together, we grow in spirit. Together, we act for justice.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Reverend Kirk Freeman. My pronouns are he and him. My folks at Davies call me Pastor Kirk, and I like that, so you're welcome to call me that as well. It's good to be here at Accotink. I have several connections to this congregation. One is Brenna. We swapped roles over the last few years. For a while, she was a chaplain intern at the NIH, and then an intern at Rockville, and I was an intern at Rockville, and then a chaplain at NIH. We've sort of passed each other and known each other in collegial networks that way. Also, my wife and I both used to work in politics, and she went first in going into a new career, and that was partly started here at Accotink at an OWL training, an Our Whole Lives training. So it's always good to be here with you. There is power in us coming together this morning. There's joy in us coming together this morning. There's community in us coming together. There's comfort in coming together. There's challenge in coming together. There's love in coming together. There is power in us coming together. It is good to be together. At Davies and here at Accotink, we are celebrating the spiritual theme of invitation. And so I thought it would be fitting to share a time for all ages called The Invitation. The Invitation is by Stacey May Fowles with pictures by Marie LaFrance. All right. It was a beautiful fall day when Fern pulled a mysterious yellow envelope from her mailbox. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the leaves were turning from green to gold. But Fern didn't notice any of that. Instead, she stared at the mysterious yellow envelope, worrying about all the things that could possibly be inside. The more Fern worried, the longer she waited to open the envelope, and the longer she waited to open the envelope, the more she worried. Questions clouded her mind, like, what if something's happened? What if it's bad news? What if? Fern worried so hard and wondered so long that she didn't even notice her friend Fawn appear on the front lawn. Beautiful fall day, Fawn called. What's that you have there? I don't really know, Fern replied sadly. Then you should open it, called Fawn, swatting away the storm. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. And so with Fawn standing beside her, Fern slowly tore open the mysterious envelope. Inside, she found a card that said, "Super Special Surprise Exhibition." "But I don't like surprises," Fern said. "What could possibly happen?" asked Fawn. Fern thought about this important question, clutching the invitation close to her chest. "I have a great idea," Fawn said with another swat. "I will go with you to the museum." Reluctantly, Fern agreed. As they walked, Fern continued to worry and wonder, "What if we can't make it in time for the super special surprise?" Fern asked. "Well, then we'll ask a friendly chipmunk for a shortcut through the forest, of course," Fawn replied. And the little chipmunk points the way. "But what if a tree suddenly falls and blocks the shortcut?" Fern asked. "Well, then we'll ask a grumpy bear to lift it for us, of course," Fawn replied. "That was me this morning." "But what if all that lifting makes the bear hungry?" Fern asked. "Well, then we'll take him to the cake shop for a treat, of course," Fawn replied. "But what if he gets a toothache from all that cake?" Fern asked. "Well, then we'll take him to the brave dentist, of course," Fawn replied. "But what if a visit to the dentist makes us late for the super special surprise?" Fern asked. "Well, then we'll ask the brave dentist for a ride in her little red car, of course," Fawn replied. "But what if we get to the museum and we don't know anyone there?" Fern asked. "If you don't know anyone there, why would you have gotten an invitation in the first place?" Fern thought about this for a moment. "Well, then I think we should introduce the friendly chipmunk, the grumpy bear, and the brave dentist to the stomping dinosaurs, the spooky Egyptian mummies, and the giant blue whale, so they'll all know someone too," Fern said. "Of course," replied Fawn. "And if they have nothing to talk about, maybe we can ask the noble knights in shining armor to serve up the rest of the grumpy bear's toothache cake in the medieval wing." "Of course." Much to Fern's very pleasant surprise, they had made it all the way to the museum. Fern suddenly noticed the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the leaves were turning from green to gold. And she noticed something else. Lots of the other guests with their own bright yellow envelopes. "Shall we go in and be surprised?" Fawn asked. Fern took a deep breath. "Of course. What could possibly happen?" They go inside, and there's a dance party at the museum. I guess that happens from time to time. And then, as soon as it had begun, the exhibition was done. After all the talking, eating, dancing, singing, and being surprised by the super special surprise. The friendly chipmunk and the not-so-grumpy bear, the stomping dinosaurs, the spooky Egyptian mummies, the giant blue whale, the noble knights in shining armor, Fern and Fawn all piled into the brave dentist's little car for a ride back home. The sun was setting, the birds were going to bed, and everyone agreed that it had been a day full of wonderful surprises. Fern waved goodbye as the little red car drove away. And just before going inside, she took a peek inside her mailbox. That's the end of the story, but I want to point out this little dedication from the illustrator who says, "To all fellow sufferers of pervasive anxiety, may you find or become your own Fawn."
All right, this morning's reading comes from Arab-American poet Naomi Shihab Nye. It is her poem, Red Brocade. The Arabs used to say, when a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's come from, where he's headed. That way, he'll have strength enough to answer. Or by then, you'll be such good friends, you don't care. Let's go back to that. Rice, pine nuts? Here, take the red brocade pillow. My child will serve water to your horse. No, I was not busy when you came. I was not preparing to be busy. That's the armor everyone puts on to pretend they had a purpose in the world. I refuse to be claimed. Your plate is waiting. We will snip fresh mint into your tea.
I'm so grateful to be here with you today. And as I was awaiting the service, the beginning of the service, I was hiding sort of back in that corner and have the pleasure of welcoming another guest here today. So I'm happy that I'm not the only visitor. And it's appropriate that we're talking about invitation in the season when many people come exploring Unitarian Universalist congregations. Pulpit swaps like the one we're engaging in today between Accotink and Davies have deep roots in our Unitarian Universalist traditions. In fact, in the 1800s, this very practice played a pivotal role in creating what became Unitarianism. It was common in New England churches for Congregationalist churches to exchange preachers periodically. This not only offered ministers a nice little break between sermons, but it also allowed congregations to hear from a variety of perspectives, both liberal and conservative, as well as orthodox interpretations of faith. However, as we know, congregations tend to form around people who share similar values, and before long, controversy arose, particularly among the more conservative churches. A heated debate emerged over whether liberal ministers who questioned Christian doctrines such as the inerrancy of the Bible or the doctrine of the Trinity would still be allowed to preach from the pulpits of the more orthodox congregations. This dispute led to the dissolution of the Massachusetts official sponsorship of the particular Congregationalist church and resulted in a formal split with the more liberal Unitarians on one side and the conservative Calvinists on the others. Fortunately, Rev Lev and I do not face such deep divisions, and in many ways we're more alike than we are different. In fact, he's one of my dearest colleagues, and it's an honor to be here at the congregation he serves. Nevertheless, through practices like these pulpit swaps or other shared efforts such as the parents group that Rev Lev and I are co-leading, we're striving to build stronger relationships across our congregations and a deeper sense of Unitarian and Universalist identity here in the region. And it's also fitting that we're doing this for the first time in this month about invitation. In the poem this morning, poet Naomi Shihab Nye, I'm getting fast. In the poem this morning, poet Naomi Shihab Nye gives an example of welcome. Here, you take the comfortable pillow. Here, your plate is waiting. Your horse will be given water. You have my attention. I want to know what you want to tell me, and I care about what you need to be comfortable here. We'll snip fresh mint into your tea. And in the story for all ages, we heard a dramatic telling of the experience of receiving an invitation and immediately feeling a sense of dread. A dread rooted in concerns about not fitting in, about encountering a group with expectations, inside jokes, norms, and conventions that we don't know yet, but fear we may be held to. The fear that we will be seen as an imposter, perhaps. The fear that we are not enough. The fear of being made to feel ashamed of who we are. That story rings true to me, and I wonder if it rings true to any of you. The fear of shame, this anxiety about wanting to fit in, the deep desire to belong. This question of who belongs and who doesn't is in some ways hardwired in our brains and our patterns of behavior. They come from our survival instincts, hardwired from our earliest years. Our baby brains seek to distinguish between what is safe and what is a threat, between who are our people and who are strangers. For safety, we adopt and adapt to the behaviors and expectations of those we want to belong with, those we want to protect us. But these norms and standards are relative. They depend on our relatives. They depend on our environment and relationships, and we carry them with us throughout our lives. And eventually it becomes not just about determining safety, it becomes a question of where do I belong? And this question manifests itself in many ways. From the relatively innocuous, such as, do you like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones? Kendrick Lamar or Drake? Star Wars or Star Trek? To the more pernicious, are you a real man or woman? Are you a real American? Are you a true believer? And to the dangerous, are you good or evil? Are you one of us or are you one of them? This hardwired instinct to sort out who is who and where we belong is especially clear and especially fraught as we approach the election just over 6 weeks from now. This instinct is harnessed by politicians to motivate us through fear. It is utilized by marketers to sell us things through shame. And its power is made even stronger by things like social media and algorithms that seek to define us and then offer us things that people like us will like. Our instincts and our cultural norms encourage us to seek out others who are just like us, and our instincts and cultural norms encourage us to conform to the expectations of the groups where we feel safest, to toe the party line, as it were. I wonder if you can think of a time when you've made up your mind about a big and complicated question based not on your own deep reflection and analysis, but instead by relying on the views of a group you already belong to. As a former congressional staffer and lobbyist, I can tell you that I've done that more than my fair share of times, towing the party line. But is this true belonging? As Unitarian Universalists, we often say that our congregations radically welcome all. And I think it's important from time to time to think through what that means. And in the simplest way I can think to say it is, you already belong. You already have inherent worth and dignity. You are already a part of this interdependent web. You do not have to earn your place. You do not have to conform. You are loved for who you are. We've been expecting you. We look forward to the future we will create together. You already belong. Now, the poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, compared to the children's story, offers another perspective on invitation and welcome. In fact, it doesn't even include an invitation. And this is an important point. Sometimes when we think of inviting others to be part of something we love, the invitation itself might imply ownership. It can, even if extremely subtly, suggest that this is our space and you are welcome to join us if you conform. But a welcome says, you are who you are, and we've been waiting for you. We want to know you as you, and we expect that our lives will be changed for the better through our relationship with you. We want to offer this kind of welcome not just because it's ethically right or because we want to be good, but because we know from our own experience that it is the right and loving way to behave. Moreover, this form of welcome is tied explicitly to our shared values, our shared covenants. It is a form of universalism, of universal love. It connects us to our forebears who said, God is too good to damn anyone, that all people are worthy of divine love and acceptance because they are good and whole just as they are made. One of my colleagues, C.B. Beale, coined the phrase preemptive radical inclusion, and they define it as follows. Preemptive radical inclusion means that we intentionally position ourselves before we know anything at all about anyone else in the room to presuppose that everyone is already in the room. We don't wait for an individual to tell us what they need and then meet their needs. We create experiences that preemptively involve them. The burden is on those in leadership to be aware of the needs of the people we are most likely to miss, the needs we are most likely to miss. Needs that can be reasonably anticipated with ongoing education to increase what we can anticipate along with our capacity to account for it in the way people need. That's a long quote from C.B. Beale. Can you recall a time when you arrived somewhere and felt like you already belonged? Like your needs were met without you having to ask for it? I hope you've experienced this, and I hope you've experienced it here at Accotink or any other UU congregation you've attended. But I'm sure you've also felt excluded at times, and I'm sure you've even felt that here at Accotink or at other UU congregations. To be a faith that radically welcomes all, we must transition from invitation to welcome, from come join us to we thought you might need a pillow. We're prepared to water your horse. We've got a plate ready for you. You are not an imposition because we want you here and we prepared for your arrival. And I want to highlight the fact that preemptive radical inclusion is not about perfection. It is a vision, a goal of anticipating whatever anyone may need before they have to ask for it, but it is also a practice. That is, it expects that we will fall short, and it encourages us to continue to learn to do better. So in some ways, it's like the scientific method. It's a cycle of hypothesis, experimentation, and observation. And like the scientific method, we learn more from trying and failing than by doing something that we know will work in advance. As Samuel Beckett once said, try again, fail better. Fail better. And I have an example of this from recent experience at Davies. I've been setting as a guiding principle for this year, the goal for myself is increasing access and inclusion with an eye towards growth, not seeking growth for growth's sake, but by building accessibility and inclusion first. It's about ensuring that no matter who arrives at Davies knows that they already belong. And so we've been experimenting with some things this year. It's also my second year at Davies, so I'm feeling a little more comfortable and able to take some risks. And one thing we've brought back that disappeared during the COVID pandemic was the tradition that Davies has had since it was formed, to stand at the end of the service, holding hands around the sanctuary, singing the song we just sang, "From you I receive, to you I give." This has been a tradition for decades, for as long as it's been a congregation. I was hearing from a lot of people that they wanted it to come back, and they thought this new minister might be a chance to bring it back. And so this year, on our opening in-gathering Sunday, we did it. I saw many faces in the crowd, some who were super excited that it came back, and others who were uncomfortable. Now, I'd considered some of the things I knew I needed to consider. How do we involve folks who are online, who are not here to touch one another? But I totally forgot to consider the needs of those who are at greater risk for infection or who are caring for a loved one with compromised immune systems. I even forgot to consider the needs of those with mobility challenges who may have a difficult time joining the circle. And I hadn't considered the needs of those with sensory sensitivities who otherwise prefer not to be touched, not to hold hands. So in that moment, I fell short of my own goal of accessibility and inclusion. But rather than beating myself up, rather than spending a week feeling shame, I chose to learn from it. And so we began to experiment with new ways of doing this, opportunities for those who chose to stand and felt the need to hold hands, to negotiate that with each other, establish consent. For those who wish to stay off to the side, to make sure that the circle doesn't close in front of them. For those who choose and are unable to stand or move to the corner, to experience the feeling of being held by the congregation and feeling those on the outside, feeling the love emanating back. Now, this new process may cause additional negotiation, may take a little extra time at the end of the service. We'll continue to learn and adapt, but I'm also not resisting any change. We're embracing the change. We're doing our best to meet the needs of those who are in the room, to imagine that everyone is already there, and do our best to include and be accessible to all. And as we do adapt, learn, and try again, we are trying to live ever more deeply into our shared vision of beloved community. Now, as I move to close, I want to make it clear that this practice of radical inclusion in our UU congregations and UU spaces is not just for the sake of our congregations. It is an act of resistance against forces that seek to divide, segregate, and separate us. I know Rev Lev preached earlier this month from the book, The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. We do talk a lot. We explore ideas together. But the very first paragraph of Priya Parker's book, she writes, "The way we gather matters. Gatherings consume our days and help determine the kind of world we live in both our intimate and public realms. Gathering, the conscious bringing together of people for a reason, shapes the way we feel, think, and make sense of our world. Lawgivers have understood, perhaps as well as anyone, the power inherent in gatherings. In democracies, the freedom to assemble is one of the most foundational rights granted to every individual. And in countries descending into authoritarianism, ones we must continue to study, one of the very first things to go is the right to assemble. That's because of what can happen when people come together. They exchange information, inspire one another, and test new ways of being, disrupting notions of control and rigid senses of how one can be in this world. So radical hospitality is an act of resistance. It is an act of creating connections and belonging, of creating something new, and we need it now more than ever.
And as you are comfortable, you may join hands with your neighbor if they're also comfortable, or we can just raise our hands together. So as we extinguish our chalice, I invite you to join me now in our community blessing with these words of David Bumbaugh, slightly adapted. This church is dedicated to the proposition that by embracing all our differences and celebrating our diversity, we honor the unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity. And now that we've gathered together in this welcoming and inclusive spiritual home, let us go out into the world nourished, rejuvenated, and inspired to share our values.